At 30, I thought I'd finally carved out a space for myself in the world. My life was far from perfect, but it was steady. I worked in IT, a career I had built from scratch with countless late nights and endless cups of coffee. I had a group of friends I could rely on, and most importantly, I had a home. A house I'd bought 2 years ago with the pride of someone who'd finally made it out of cramped apartments and shared spaces. The house wasn't enormous, but it was mine. A 3-bedroom craftsman with hardwood floors that creaked just the right amount, and a backyard I'd imagined filling with laughter and barbecues. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had control. Then came the call. My parents, Robert and Elaine, had decided to sell their house in the small town where I grew up. They wanted to be closer to me. They said, as retired librarians, they'd always lived quietly, and now they wanted to enjoy city life. Without thinking twice, I offered them a place to stay. At first, the arrangement worked well. My parents moved in with only a few suitcases, leaving most of their belongings in storage. I helped them settle in, giving them the guest bedroom and rearranging the house so they'd have space for their books and trinkets. They were easy to live with, quiet and respectful, just as I remembered. My mom cooked dinner a few nights a week, filling the house with the comforting smells of my childhood, and my dad spent hours in the backyard, tending to a small garden he'd insisted on starting. We didn't discuss finances because it wasn't necessary. I paid the mortgage, the bills, and the groceries. They contributed by keeping the house in order and offering me company, which I appreciated after years of living alone. It felt good to give back to the people who had always supported me. But even good arrangements have expiration dates. I assumed my parents would eventually find a place of their own, but as weeks turned into months, they showed no signs of leaving. Every time I brought up the idea of them finding a rental or even exploring retirement communities, my mom would wave me off. "We're not in a rush," she'd say. "This is so nice, Daniel. Why would we leave?" I didn't push. It was harmless, I told myself. They were my parents. They deserved comfort. What I didn't realize was how quickly the balance of my home was about to shift and how fragile the peace I'd built really was. The first warning sign came in the form of a phone call. It was Amanda, my sister, calling with her signature mix of charm and urgency. "Guess what?" she said, her voice practically bubbling through the receiver. "Eric and I are expecting a baby." Despite our strained relationship, I was genuinely happy for her. "That's great news, Amanda. Congratulations." But no sooner had I said the words than she pivoted to the real purpose of her call. "Well, here's the thing, Daniel," she began, her tone softening in the way it always did when she wanted something. "We've had a tough year financially. With the baby coming, we really need a place to stay while we figure things out. Just for a little while." I hesitated. Amanda and I had never been particularly close. Growing up, she was always the golden child, top of her class, captain of her soccer team, the one who seemed to shine effortlessly in everything she did. I was the quiet, unassuming sibling who preferred books and computers to trophies and spotlights. Still, she was family. And with a baby on the way, how could I say no? When Amanda and Eric arrived, they didn't come with just a suitcase or two like I'd naively imagined. They came with a moving van, a full-size moving van that took up the entire driveway. "What's all this?" I asked as I stood on the porch, watching movers unload box after box. "Oh, it's just a few things we couldn't leave behind," Amanda said breezily, directing the movers into the house. "You know, essentials for the baby?" It quickly became clear that essentials meant everything they owned. My once pristine living room was suddenly a maze of baby gear, including a crib that somehow ended up leaning against my couch. The guest room, which I had carefully prepared for them, was packed to the ceiling with their belongings. Eric, meanwhile, treated the house like a hotel. Within days, he'd taken over the garage with his tools and started using the dining table as his personal workbench. He left half-finished projects scattered around and didn't bother cleaning up after himself. "It's just until the baby comes," Amanda assured me one evening as she folded baby clothes on my couch without asking. But I could already feel the weight of their presence in every corner of my home. Then came the subtle remarks. "This guest room is so tiny," Amanda complained one morning, as if I hadn't gone out of my way to make it comfortable for them. "I don't know how we're going to fit once the baby's here." Eric chimed in later, muttering about how it was ridiculous that he didn't have proper workspace for his projects. "A house this size should have a proper garage setup," he said, as if I designed the house just to inconvenience him. The worst was Amanda's offhand comment during dinner one night. "You know, the baby needs space to grow. It's not like you're using all the rooms, Daniel." I froze mid-bite, a sinking feeling settling in my stomach. The boundaries I thought were clear were already being tested. and I had a terrible feeling this was only the beginning. What started as small intrusions quickly snowballed into a full-scale invasion. Amanda seemed to think my house was her personal canvas, and every day I discovered something else she had changed. The bookshelf in the living room, rearranged to make room for baby books and photo frames. My coffee table, replaced with a bulky play mat, just to get the baby used to the space. Even the kitchen cabinets weren't safe. I opened one to grab a mug and found it filled with baby bottles and formula instead of my usual dishes. Eric was no better. The garage, once a place where I kept my tools and gardening supplies, had become his workshop. He'd drag in an old desk and stack piles of lumber against the walls. Half-finished projects littered every surface, from birdhouses to some kind of crib modification he never bothered to complete. When I asked him to clean up, he waved me off with a distracted, "I'll get to it." But the real breaking point came when Amanda stopped pretending to respect boundaries altogether. One evening, as I was working late in my office, I overheard voices drifting from the kitchen. It was Amanda talking to Mom. "It just makes sense for us to have the master bedroom," Amanda said, her tone matter-of-fact. "The baby needs space, and Daniel doesn't really need such a big room, does he?" My stomach dropped. I stood up, hesitated for a moment, and then marched into the kitchen. "What did you just say?" I demanded, my voice sharp enough to make Amanda jump. She recovered quickly, her expression shifting to mock innocence. "Oh, don't overreact, Daniel. We were just discussing options." "Options?" I snapped. "You mean stealing my bedroom? In my house? The one I pay for?" Amanda didn't even flinch. "Mom said it was fine," she replied, her tone dismissive. "Honestly, you're being selfish. This is about the baby, Daniel. Don't you care about your own nephew?" I turned to Mom, hoping for support. Surely she'd defend me, or at least acknowledge how absurd Amanda's demand was. Instead, she avoided my gaze, fiddling with the edge of a dish towel. "It's just temporary," she mumbled. "Maybe it wouldn't hurt to let them have a little extra room for the baby." I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. My own mother, the person I'd welcomed into my home without question, was siding with Amanda in taking over my space. "No," I said firmly, my voice shaking with both anger and disbelief. "This is my house. You don't get to decide who gets what room." Amanda rolled her eyes. "You're being ridiculous," she said, brushing past me to grab a glass of water. "We're family, Daniel. It's not like you'll even notice the difference." I stood there, stunned, as Amanda and Mom continued their conversation as though nothing had happened. That was the moment I realized I couldn't trust them. They didn't see this house as mine. They saw it as theirs. And they had no problem walking all over me to get what they wanted. Something had to change. I knew I couldn't let things fester any longer. The tension in the house had reached a boiling point, and I was done tiptoeing around Amanda's entitlement. That night, I called everyone to the dining table. Mom, Dad, Amanda, and Eric sat around the table, their expressions ranging from curious to annoyed. "I want to talk about what's been happening in this house," I began, keeping my tone calm but firm. "I've let a lot slide because I wanted to help, but things are out of control." Amanda folded her arms, already bristling. Eric looked at her, clearly waiting to follow her lead. I leaned forward, locking eyes with each of them. "Let me be clear. I own this house. I pay the mortgage. I pay the bills. I provided everything, rent-free, for all of you because I wanted to help. But that doesn't mean you can treat me, or this house, like an afterthought." Amanda scoffed, breaking the silence. "We're family, Daniel. Why are you acting like we're strangers?" "Because you're not acting like family," I shot back. "You're acting entitled." Eric leaned back in his chair, smirking. "So what? You're going to start charging us rent now? Is that the kind of brother you want to be?" "No," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "But I do expect you to respect my space. That includes keeping the master bedroom off limits. I'm not moving out of my own room, and I'm not giving up my office. If you want more space, there are other solutions, like finding your own place." Amanda rolled her eyes. "You're making such a big deal out of nothing. It's just a room, Daniel. The baby needs space." "I've already made my decision," I said, cutting her off. "This isn't up for debate." Mom, ever the peacemaker, tried to intervene. "Daniel, can't we find a compromise? Maybe Amanda can use the office for the baby's things. Or you could switch rooms temporarily, just until the baby gets older." I stared at her in disbelief. "No, Mom. This is my home. I've done more than enough. If Amanda and Eric don't like the arrangements, they're free to leave." Amanda pushed her chair back with a screech, standing up with a glare. "You're being selfish. This is exactly why you've always been second best. You don't know how to think about anyone but yourself. Her words stung, but I refused to let her see it. I think about everyone in this house, I replied. I've been thinking about you since the day you moved in, but now I'm thinking about myself. And that's not going to change. She stormed off, slamming the door to the guest room behind her. Eric followed a moment later, muttering something under his breath. I thought, for a brief moment, that this was the end of it. I'd said my piece, set my boundaries, and made it clear where I stood. But I couldn't have been more wrong. Even after the family meeting, Amanda and Eric didn't stop. If anything, they seemed emboldened, as if my refusal to give in had turned this into a challenge they were determined to win. The first sign was subtle. I came home one evening and noticed the kitchen cabinets had been fitted with baby-proof locks. Every drawer and cupboard required a specific maneuver to open. I stood there, baffled, pulling at one of the handles until it finally clicked free. Amanda? I called out. She appeared in the doorway, unbothered. Oh, yeah, I forgot to mention, I had those installed. The baby's going to start crawling soon, and I didn't want him getting into anything dangerous. I stared at her, dumbfounded. The baby isn't even born yet. Well, it's better to be prepared, she said, brushing past me to grab a snack from the fridge. A week later, I discovered an even bigger violation. When I went to my office to retrieve some work files, I found the door ajar and the once organized room in complete disarray. Papers were stacked haphazardly on the floor, my books had been shoved into a corner, and the desk was covered in baby supplies, diapers, bottles, and even a changing mat. Amanda! I shouted, my voice echoing down the hall. She appeared, clearly annoyed at being interrupted. What's the problem now? What's the problem? I snapped, gesturing to the chaos in my office. You cleared out my workspace for this? Without asking me? We needed somewhere to store the baby stuff, she said, as if it were the most reasonable thing in the world. You barely even use this room. I couldn't believe her audacity. This is my house, Amanda. You can't just do whatever you want. She shrugged. You're being dramatic. It's just a room. The final straw came on a Saturday. I walked in after a long shift, exhausted and looking forward to some peace, only to find my living room unrecognizable. The furniture had been pushed against the walls, replaced with folding tables and pink and blue decorations. A buffet table lined one wall, covered in catered food, and at least 15 strangers milled about, chatting and laughing. What the hell is this? I demanded, loud enough to draw attention. Amanda, standing near the buffet with a plate of food, looked at me with mild annoyance. Oh, relax, Daniel. It's just a baby shower. I told you we were having it here. No, you didn't, I said, my voice shaking with anger. You never even asked. She rolled her eyes. It's just one afternoon. You're seriously going to freak out over this? I scanned the room, strangers staring at me like I was the intruder in my own home. The entitlement, the complete disregard for my space and boundaries was unbearable. That night, after everyone had left and the house was finally quiet, I sat at my desk, or rather, what was left of it, and opened my laptop. I started drafting a plan. Enough was enough. It was time to reclaim my home. I woke up the morning after the baby's shower feeling like a stranger in my own home. Amanda's blatant disregard for my boundaries had pushed me past my breaking point. Sitting at my desk, I researched tenant laws and reached out to a lawyer for advice. When I explained the situation, the lawyer didn't mince words. You're well within your rights to evict them, she said. This is your property, and they have no legal claim to stay. Issue a formal notice giving them 30 days to vacate, and if they don't comply, you can proceed with legal action. The idea of evicting my own family made me sick to my stomach, but I couldn't see another way. They had bulldozed every boundary I'd set, and it was clear they wouldn't stop unless I took drastic action. That evening, I sat across from Amanda, Eric, Mom, and Dad at the dining table. The tension in the room was palpable as I placed 2 envelopes on the table, sliding them toward Amanda and Eric. What's this? Amanda asked, narrowing her eyes. Eviction notices, I replied evenly. You have 30 days to move out. Amanda's face turned crimson. You're joking, she said, though her voice betrayed her panic. I'm not, I said. I've consulted a lawyer. This is your formal notice. If you're not out in 30 days, I'll pursue legal action. Amanda slammed her hands on the table, standing up. You'd really do this to your own sister? To your nephew? What kind of monster are you? Mom and Dad were equally stunned. Dad leaned forward, his voice rising. How can you even think of doing this? We're your family. Family doesn't treat each other like this. I shot back, my voice steady but firm. I've been more than generous. I opened my home to all of you, covered the bills, and gave you space. But this has gone too far. You've disrespected me, ignored my boundaries, and treated my house like it's yours. I won't allow it anymore. Eric, who had been quiet until now, finally spoke up. You're being ridiculous. Amanda's pregnant. What kind of man throws out a pregnant woman? The kind of man who refuses to be taken advantage of, I replied. You've had plenty of time to figure out your situation. I've done more than enough. Amanda's eyes filled with tears, but I wasn't sure if they were real or just another tactic. Fine, she spat, grabbing the envelopes and storming out of the room. You'll regret this, Daniel. I turned to my parents, who sat in stunned silence. You're welcome to stay, I said, my voice softening. But only if you respect my rules. Otherwise, you'll need to go too. Mom looked like she wanted to argue, but Dad placed a hand on her arm, stopping her. I got up from the table and left the room, exhausted but resolute. For the first time in months, I felt like I was taking back control. The days following the eviction notice were pure chaos. Amanda made no effort to hide her fury, sulking around the house with exaggerated sighs and slamming doors whenever I was nearby. If she wasn't fuming, she was crying loud, theatrical sobs that always seemed to occur when Mom or Dad were around to witness them. One morning, I overheard her talking to Mom in the kitchen. He's throwing me out, pregnant and helpless, she wailed. What kind of brother does that? Where are we supposed to go? Mom, predictably, took the bait. She spent the rest of the day shooting me accusatory glares. And at dinner, she finally confronted me. You're tearing this family apart, Daniel, Mom said, her voice trembling with emotion. I set my fork down, taking a deep breath. No, Mom, Amanda's entitlement is tearing this family apart. I opened my home to her out of kindness, and all I've gotten in return is disrespect. You don't understand, she said, shaking her head. She's pregnant. She needs stability, not more stress. And what about my stability? I countered. What about my boundaries? Amanda has taken over my house, ignored my rules, and treated me like a guest in my own home. I've tried to be reasonable, but enough is enough. Dad, who had been quietly listening, finally spoke up. We all need to make sacrifices for family, Daniel. It's not about rules or boundaries. It's about doing the right thing. I stared at him, barely able to believe what I was hearing. The right thing? I repeated. I did the right thing when I let Amanda and Eric move in. But instead of being grateful, they've taken advantage of me. I won't sacrifice my peace for people who don't respect me. As the eviction deadline drew closer, Amanda and Eric doubled down on their attempts to paint me as the villain. Eric made snide comments every chance he got, calling me a landlord wannabe and muttering about how greedy I was for wanting my own space back. Amanda, meanwhile, recruited extended family members into the drama. My aunt, whom I hadn't spoken to in years, called me out of the blue to berate me. How can you kick your own sister out of her home? She demanded. She's about to have a baby. It's my home, I corrected her, my patience wearing thin. Amanda and Eric have known for months that this arrangement was temporary. They've had plenty of time to figure things out, but the calls kept coming. Cousins, family friends, even distant relatives chimed in, all parroting Amanda's narrative of being a helpless victim. I stopped answering the phone altogether, letting every message go to voicemail. Through it all, I stood firm. I reminded myself why I had issued the eviction notice in the first place. To reclaim my home, my space, and my peace. Let them call me selfish. Let them call me heartless. I knew the truth, and I wasn't backing down. The morning of Amanda and Eric's move out was thick with tension. From the moment I walked into the kitchen, the air felt heavy. Boxes were scattered everywhere. Half-packed, some already taped shut, others left open with baby clothes spilling out. Amanda was pacing, muttering complaints under her breath, while Eric stomped around the house, making as much noise as humanly possible. I stayed out of their way, sipping my coffee in silence as I watched the chaos unfold. Every so often, Amanda would huff dramatically, throwing pointed glances in my direction, clearly hoping to bait me into an argument. I didn't bite. When Eric dropped a box in the hallway, the sound echoing through the house, he looked up at me and smirked. Hope you're happy, Daniel, he said, kicking out your own family. Real classy. By mid-afternoon, most of their things were loaded into their car and a rented trailer parked in the driveway. Amanda was down to packing the last few boxes, her movements sharp and deliberate, as though each item she touched was a statement of defiance. You know, she said suddenly, not looking at me, you've ruined this family. I didn't respond, but she kept going, her voice rising with each word. Mom and Dad are devastated. Eric and I are going to have to struggle because of you. And don't even think about meeting your nephew. You're dead to me, Daniel." She turned to face me, her eyes glossy with tears. Whether from genuine sadness or calculated manipulation, I couldn't tell. "Don't expect to be part of my son's life," she said again, her voice trembling. I held her gaze but didn't say a word. I knew that anything I said would only escalate things further. Finally, as the sun dipped lower in the sky, they were ready to leave. Eric climbed into the driver's seat while Amanda lingered by the car door, casting one last glare in my direction. "You'll regret this," she said, her voice cold. As their car pulled away, the trailer rattling behind it, I stood in the driveway, watching until they disappeared down the street. Relief washed over me, but it was tinged with sadness. I had never wanted things to end this way. Despite everything, Amanda was still my sister, and I had hoped for a better relationship with her. But as I turned and walked back into my now quiet house, I knew I had made the right decision. For the first time in months, the space felt like mine again. With Amanda and Eric gone, the house felt quieter, almost eerily so. For the first time in months, there wasn't the constant hum of arguments, slammed doors, or Amanda's passive-aggressive comments. But the relief I felt was dampened by the lingering frustration I had toward my parents. I found them sitting together in the living room, a tense silence hanging between them. They both looked up as I entered the room, and I didn't waste any time. "We need to talk," I said, my voice calm but firm. "You two enabled all of this. You undermined me in my own home, and it made everything worse." Mom's eyes widened in surprise, while Dad leaned back, folding his arms. "We were just trying to keep the peace," Dad said defensively. "You know how Amanda is. She doesn't listen to reason." "Exactly," I said. "She doesn't listen because you never held her accountable. Every time she crossed a line, you let her get away with it. You didn't just enable her behavior. You encouraged it by not backing me up." Mom opened her mouth to argue, but stopped, looking away. I continued, laying out every transgression Amanda and Eric had committed. The baby-proof locks, the takeover of my office, the unauthorized baby shower, and their blatant disrespect for my boundaries. "This isn't just about my house," I said, my voice rising slightly. "It's about respect. Amanda treated me like I didn't matter, and you let her." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Mom broke the silence. "You're right," she said quietly. "We didn't handle this well. I thought we were helping, but we just made it worse." Dad sighed, rubbing his temples. "I didn't want to take sides, but I guess by staying neutral, I made things harder for you." "I'm sorry, Daniel." I appreciated their apologies, but the tension didn't disappear. "If you want to stay here, we need to establish some boundaries," I said, meeting their eyes. "This is my house. I'm happy to have you here, but you have to respect my authority as the homeowner. That means no more undermining me, no more siding with Amanda at my expense, and no more excuses for bad behavior." They nodded, both looking chastened. It wasn't the perfect resolution, and I knew it would take time to rebuild trust. But for now, it was a start. At least they finally understood the damage that had been done, not just to my home, but to our relationships. For the first time in months, the house was quiet. No baby gear cluttering the living room. No Eric's tools scattered across the garage. No late-night arguments or passive-aggressive comments. As I stood in the entryway, taking it all in, a wave of relief washed over me. It felt like I could finally breathe again. I spent the next few days reclaiming my space. The master bedroom was the first to be restored. I moved my furniture back in, arranging it just the way I liked. The crib and baby items Amanda had left behind were packed up and donated. As I settled back into my room, I felt a small but powerful sense of ownership. This was my sanctuary, and it would remain that way. The office was next. Clearing out the baby supplies and reorganizing my desk felt almost therapeutic, as though I was physically removing the stress and chaos that Amanda and Eric had brought into my life. The final touch was a new plant I bought, a small pot hose that I placed on the windowsill, a quiet symbol of growth and renewal. The remnants of Amanda's baby shower were the hardest to deal with. The decorations, the leftover party favors, even the scent of the catered food brought back the anger I'd felt that day. But as I threw everything into garbage bags, I reminded myself that this was the last step in reclaiming my home. With each task completed, the house began to feel like mine again. The rooms that once felt overrun now radiated calm and comfort. The quiet wasn't just an absence of noise. It was a presence, a peaceful reminder that I had taken control of my life and my space. Though my parents stayed, their behavior shifted noticeably. They treaded more lightly, asking before making changes and respecting my decisions without pushback. It wasn't a perfect dynamic, some tension still lingered, but it was manageable. As for Amanda, our relationship remained fractured. She didn't call, and I didn't reach out either. Part of me missed the bond we'd had when we were kids, but I knew that bond had long since been replaced by entitlement and manipulation. Coming to terms with that wasn't easy. There were moments when guilt crept in, whispers in my mind asking if I could have handled things differently. But deep down, I knew I'd made the right choice. Setting boundaries with family is never easy, but it was necessary for my well-being. For the first time in months, I felt at peace. This house, like my life, was mine to protect, and I wouldn't let anyone take advantage of that again. Standing in the living room, sunlight streaming through the windows, I smiled to myself. It was the quiet kind of happiness, the kind that comes not from triumph, but from reclaiming what was rightfully mine.